You can stand at attention. You can salute with your whole chest, tears in your eyes, hand shaking against your brow, and still never board the ship. That's the part no one tells you about good intentions. They look like devotion. They feel like devotion. But a salute isn't a deployment. A soldier who honors the flag from the barracks while his unit ships out without him hasn't disobeyed loudly. He's disobeyed quietly, and quiet disobedience is the kind that never makes it into the confession. You felt this the moment you meant to forgive someone, and the feeling of meaning it sat in your chest like it had already done the work. You called it grace. It wasn't grace. It was a salute you gave from a room you never left. The moment you meant to make the call, meant to write the letter, meant to kneel and actually say the words instead of just feeling sorry for having thought them. And somewhere between the meaning and the doing, the feeling quietly clocked out early and told you it had finished the job. Somewhere inside every one of us there's a general we've promoted without permission, the version of ourselves that gets to decide which orders are worth the walk. He nods at the hard commands. He agrees in principle. He writes the agreement down somewhere private, signs it with real emotion, and then stays exactly where he is. He's not lazy. He's not cold. He is, in his own mind, one of the most devoted men in the barracks. He simply never leaves it. Psychologists have a name for what fires when you form an intention and never carry it out: the illusion of completion, the relief the mind grants itself the instant a decision is made, as if deciding were the same as doing. The brain barely distinguishes a plan fully rehearsed from an action fully finished. It rewards both the same way, with the same quiet sense of a box checked. That's not a modern discovery. It's the oldest trick inside the human will, and Scripture named it long before anyone wrote it in a journal: a heart that draws near with its lips while it stays camped miles from where its feet were ordered. Here's the part that should unsettle you. Every day you let the feeling stand in for the march, the distance between where you are and where the order sent you gets a little more familiar. Comfortable ground has a gravity of its own. The longer you stand on it agreeing with a command you haven't obeyed, the harder that ground is to leave, not because the order changed, but because you did. Something in a person calcifies the moment sentiment starts paying the debt that action was supposed to pay. It happens slowly enough that you never notice the exact day you stopped being someone who obeys and became someone who simply agrees very sincerely. There's a man in an old war record who understood this before anyone had to explain it to him. He was told to leave nothing standing, not a possession, not an animal, not a single thread of the old enemy's kingdom. He marched, he fought, he won. The battle itself cost him nothing in obedience. It was easy to be brave when bravery and glory pointed the same direction. And when the smoke cleared, he kept the best of the plunder alive, the finest cattle, the finest king, and called it worship. He told himself the leftover glory was for the altar. He believed his own paperwork so completely that when he was finally confronted, his first instinct wasn't guilt, it was defense. He didn't deny going. He listed the miles he'd walked. He listed the risk he'd taken. He gestured probably at the very animals he'd spared, as if their presence were proof of devotion instead of proof of the order he'd quietly rewritten. What he couldn't produce was the one thing that was actually asked of him. And the answer he got back still cut centuries later. Obedience is worth more than every animal you could burn on an altar in its place. Sacrifice can be staged. A ceremony can be arranged around almost anything, dressed in enough sincerity to fool the man performing it. Obedience can't be staged. It either happened or it didn't. There is no ritual clever enough to disguise the 50 feet you never walked. Somewhere else in that same record, a different man reaches out his hand toward something sacred that's about to fall, not out of rebellion, but out of instinct, out of what looked like love for the very thing he was protecting. He never crosses the line most people picture when they think of defiance. There's no clenched fist, no shouted refusal. He simply touches what he was never told to touch, in a moment that felt too urgent for permission, his hand moving faster than his obedience had ever been trained to. The response to that touch wasn't measured against his affection. It wasn't measured against how fast his heart was beating or how good his reasons sounded in the half-second he had to think them. It was measured against the instruction he skipped past to get there. Neither of these men thought of themselves as enemies of what they served. That's the detail that should stop you cold. Self-deception doesn't usually announce itself as rebellion. It shows up dressed as loyalty, holding good posture, using the right vocabulary, quoting the right verses at the right moments. It's rarely the person who says, "I don't care," who's furthest from obedience. It's the person who cares so visibly, so sincerely, that no one, including himself, thinks to ask if the caring ever turned into walking. There's something almost merciful about how the body exposes this if you're honest enough to watch it. Intention lives in the chest, obedience lives in the feet. You can feel a decision with total sincerity and still never move a muscle to carry it out, because feeling and marching use two entirely different parts of a person, and only one of them costs you anything. A feeling can be produced sitting perfectly still in the dark with your eyes closed. Obedience has never once been produced that way. It requires a body to move through space towards something it would rather avoid. This is where it gets uncomfortable to sit still, because if sincerity isn't the measure, then a great deal of what we've been quietly proud of doesn't count the way we assumed it did. The tears during the sermon, the private vow made at 2 a.m. when everything feels clearer and braver than it will at 9, the apology you composed in your head and delivered to no one. The generosity you planned so vividly you could almost feel the other person's gratitude before the plan quietly expired somewhere between Tuesday and never. Every one of those was a salute, none of them was a deployment. And here's the part almost no one says out loud: this isn't a flaw to feel crushed under, it's a door. Because the moment you stop treating the feeling as the finish line, the actual instruction, the one sitting untouched since the day you first agreed with it, becomes visible again, not vague anymore, not spiritual in the soft, safe sense that lets you nod along without cost, specific, nameable, the phone call you keep meaning to make, the relationship you keep meaning to end or repair. The habit you keep agreeing needs to die while feeding it every single night. The truth is, most people already know exactly which order they've been saluting. They've known for years. What they've been missing isn't clarity. It's the willingness to stop mistaking the salute for the ship. Real obedience has a strange, almost humiliating shape. It rarely looks like a breakthrough. It doesn't come with music behind it or a moment you'll remember as dramatic. It looks like standing up in the middle of an ordinary day and finally walking the 50 feet you've been saluting from a distance for years. No fireworks. No feeling required at all most of the time. In fact, the feeling often shows up late, arriving after the obedience, not before it, as if it were waiting to see whether you were serious before it committed to anything itself. Just the boots hitting the ground, the orders always pointed toward, one unremarkable step after another. The soldier who finally boards doesn't feel more devoted than the one who stayed behind saluting. He's not more moved, he's not more sincere. In the moment, he might even feel less certain, less inspired, less like a man having a spiritual experience. He's just the only one who actually left the shore. And it turns out that's the only version of devotion that was ever being asked for. Not the tears, not the posture, not the private vow rehearsed until it felt real. The walk. None of this makes the walk easy. No one is promising that once you stop saluting from the barracks, obedience suddenly feels light. It doesn't. The 50 feet you've been avoiding are avoided for a reason. They usually lead somewhere costly, somewhere that asks you to give up the comfort of being the kind of person who means well without ever being tested. But there is a strange peace waiting on the other side of that walk that no amount of sincere feeling has ever produced, because peace, it turns out, was never manufactured in the chest. It was only ever issued at the destination. So before you count today as faithful because your heart was in the right place, ask the harder question. Where were your feet? Not where was your intention. Intentions have never once been on trial. Where did you actually go? Because somewhere out there is a command you agreed with months ago, dressed in good intentions, standing at perfect attention, still waiting at the dock for you to finally get on the ship. And the tide doesn't wait for sincerity to turn into obedience on its own. It only waits for the ones who finally walk.